Welcome. This lecture is about how to choose your informative speech topic for our upcoming speeches. When thinking about a topic, you kind of have to ask yourself, why do we give informative speeches, right? Because the reason we do something often dictates which topics are appropriate. So there are kind of like four big reasons that we give informative speeches. The first is just there's new information or new perspectives on old information that have arrived that people need to know about. So like there's discoveries and inventions, etc. People need to know about the new stuff that we have discovered or invented. The second is to shape our perceptions. We get a certain amount of information into our little world, and sometimes we're missing information that's also really important. It just hasn't made it to our world yet. So that's what it means to shape our perceptions or to set the agenda, is to bring information that exists in the world into our little world, which has been missing this important information. The third is sometimes we just believe things that are wrong, and we need somebody to tell us that what we believe is not accurate and that there is an alternative thing that is accurate, right? So sometimes we just need to correct what we think we know to be true. And then last but not least, most of our information exists for the purpose to survive or thrive, right? The idea is that we can't live without it, and that if we get new information, then our lives are better. So sometimes the information is not even new as much as it is really crucial and important. I think we're kind of learning that in the COVID right now, that just because what a vaccine isn't new doesn't mean it's not essential information right now. All right, so those are the four purposes in mind. So when you're looking at topics, you need to ask yourself, like, does this topic that I'm interested in providing information about, does it do one of the things on this list? Is it new information or new perspective? Is it something that's not in most people's purview, but they should have it, right, in their little box of information? Is it something that people believe that's wrong, that needs to be corrected? Or is it necessary for our survival? All right. And if the answer is yes to even one of those, then it's probably an okay topic. But if it's like, no, not really, then it might be something you could provide information on, but it's probably not the most appropriate for an informative speaking setting, right? Like maybe casual conversation with your friends or your family, but that's very different than commanding the attention of an audience. So like I said before, new information. The great bulk of informative speeches are new information that's like inventions, discoveries, breakthrough, new social things that are happening, right? Like the current events, current, heavy emphasis on current, things that have happened in the last year or two. I mean, if you look at the list of suggested topics I gave you, you'll find that a lot of these are new information topics. So how do I get those topics? I think that's a question that students want to know the answer to. So what I do is I usually just Google best inventions of, and then whatever the year prior is, sometimes the year that I'm in, depending on how late in the year, right? And then all these web pages will come up that'll just tell you like, oh, the top 100 inventions, and they're usually from pretty cool gadget websites or health websites, right? Lots of STEM, science, tech, engineering, right? Math, right? And medicine type topics. I also sometimes Google new technology, science, or medicine. And sometimes I just literally surf the news for a week or two in the science or entertainment section of the newspaper. Like it doesn't have to be a new medical invention. It could be like a brand new entertainer. Like who is the hot new somebody that's coming out of the underground and is about to go mainstream or just went mainstream? Who are they? Right? Like all of those things are new information too. It doesn't have to be like, oh, I'm going to sit here and talk to you about genomes. It doesn't have to be like that. All right, it just has to be new and worthy of discussion. So sometimes there's information that's out in the world already, and it's been in the world for, I don't know, 2, 3, 4 years. 5 years is about the longest that we ever do in public speaking. But it really hasn't hit most people's like information radar or plate, if you will, right? We get our media from a very select number of sources, and those sources are pretty homogenized, which means they kind of repeat the same stories, right? Like if you watch the evening news, and you watch ABC and CBS, right, and NBC, you're going to see the same exact news stories, right, in the same evening. They're going to show you almost the exact same stuff. Um, but there's a lot of things happening in the world. And I'm going to get into agenda setting more in our informative speech lectures, so I'm not going to do it here. I'm just going to say that there's a lot of things happening into the world, and sometimes what is happening in our world is missing something that's really important because it's just not getting enough media attention. So shaping perception is a way of saying, hey, here's a thing that people aren't paying attention to, but they should pay attention to this information. It's very important information. So it's an attempt to highlight important information. All right. And, if you only watch mainstream media and you don't know what's maybe outside of it, here are some suggestions. PBS NewsHour is very credible and outside of it. Democracy Now! With Amy Goodman, who's a credibly reputable reporter. Science Daily is good. The BBC. So the BBC is actually kind of mainstream. It's not very mainstream in America, but like globally it is. But it's very, very credible. And it's mainstream, but it ranks very low on bias indexes, like by Pew, who like goes through and evaluates media sources to see if they have a left or a right wing slant. BBC tends to rate very low on bias indexes. So does the Wall Street Journal and The Economist. Those are a little bit more mainstream. You should be able to find them easily, but they're all pretty credible and objective. ProPublica is another good sort of outside of the mainstream source, very objective. Investigative journalism. So these are some ideas for if you're like, well, I'm interested, but I don't know what's outside of the media because all I get is generic media. These are some places you could go look to expand your range. Look, sometimes what we believe is just not true, and or people believe it, and it's just fundamentally not true. In which case, we need to articulate an alternative. To do that, we need to explain why a thing is wrong and what the true thing is. So important to know about this speech, you are correcting a widespread and circulating misunderstanding. So it can't be something that just like a few radical people believe, like the lizard people. Like most people don't believe in the lizard people. So there's no point in doing a speech to debunk something that 99% of your audience is like, yeah, I never believed that anyways. All right. Also, don't be confused with conspiracy theory. So this is not an opportunity to tell us about chemtrails, right? Or, whatever it is, your conspiracy theory about how Tupac died. This isn't that moment. Articulating alternative speeches, one of the core components of them is that they have credible sources and they're trying to debunk something that's not credible. It's not to set up a new conspiracy theory with a bunch of other people who also aren't credible. So the big emphasis is on the credibility. So there are already lots of websites that do this type of work that you would want to use to help you with your speech, right? Snopes, PolitiFact, All Sides. These are really good basic fact-checking resources. And we might want to check some facts, like did small businesses really get the small business COVID relief funds? Is that true? Is that what happened? Does fake news really impact our elections? There's a lot of information that says it is, but there's also a really great Scientific American article that says not as much as we think, that it actually doesn't get circulated by very many people. And that the real danger is when mainstream media people circulate fake news. That's the real danger because then it appears as if it's coming from a credible source and it gets circulated a lot. But like your auntie or your uncle circulating, it's actually doesn't really impact the election like we think. Right? That's a great Scientific American article. All right. But maybe that's not true either. I don't know. You have to do the research on it. All these election fraud lawsuits, like what's the truth about them? Are they true? Are they not true? Right? This is what I mean by articulating alternatives, right? It's where you just sort of do a truth investigation of a concept. There are some speeches we just give for survival information, right? We need information to survive. I think everybody kind of gets a better grasp of that now that we're in a global pandemic, right? Because there's just information about COVID that we need to survive, like the strain mutation. We need this information to live. Other people need this information to live. It's not always brand new as much as it is essential, right? So we need to understand what a vaccine is right now. Maybe we didn't need to know that 3 years ago. We just like went and got them and accepted them. But now we need to know what they are because we need to understand the process of why we have new vaccines and how we got them so fast, which once you start to do the research, you're like, oh man, maybe we could have had vaccines for a whole bunch of other things a lot faster if we had put our time into it. All right. So we need to know about the hospitals and COVID and whether or not the hospitals are overburdened and what that means. We need to know about the Armenian war that is currently happening. It impacts other people's life, their ability to survive, maybe people you know and love. We need to know about Flint's water crisis. It's still not been resolved. People are still in a great amount of physical danger. This is survival information. Okay, I'm going to wrap this up with just a small warning. Do not persuade us during your informative speech. We have a different speech for that. So, what does that mean? It means don't tell us how to believe or how to behave or what to do with the information you have just given us. So, if you're like, well, I want to inform you about kidnapping, and here's 7 ways to avoid kidnapping. No, that is telling us how to behave, right? You're telling us these are things that you do. That's not what we're looking for right now. All right, if you want to talk about kidnapping, you could talk about how kidnapping has gone up in COVID and all the new clever ways that that is going down. That would be brand new information for us. It makes a lot of sense. Don't tell us how to behave. Don't tell us what to do. Be very careful with how you tell us what to believe. Obviously, you're giving us this information because you want us to believe it. But that is not the same thing as saying, I have the truth and everything you believe is false, so you must believe my truth. No, no. Lay out your case before us and hope that we decide to agree with you based on how well you have laid out your case. Do not tell us what to do, how to behave, or what we have to believe.